Well, good morning. We're going to be spending most of our time in this lesson in Joshua. So if you want to turn your Bibles over to the book of Joshua, we'll be there. We'll start in Joshua chapter 7. You may remember after Moses died, it was Joshua who God appointed to lead the children of Israel for the time being as they traveled into the promised land. This is the second generation of Israel. The first generation, remember, they failed to trust God and they grumbled and complained. And so God allowed them to die in the wilderness. They were laid low in the wilderness, as the Bible says. And then the second generation, it's now time for them to go in. So Joshua is in the leadership position and he leads them. Well, God gave them specific instructions about how to cross the Jordan River. And they were to take those 12 stones. Each stone was to be representative of one of the tribes. And they set them up. And of course, the Jordan River was parted, and they were able to go in procession behind the Ark of the Covenant in accordance with the instructions that God gave. And everything worked out great. They got across the Jordan River, and they came into the land of Canaan. Now these, men who are of fighting age, 20 years old and older, that are with Joshua, are going in to do battle. And so these are, men who are ready to do some fighting, going to be putting people to death and so forth. So they're coming in, and the first place that they come across is Jericho. Now you remember the story of Jericho. Jericho, God gave them instructions about how to overtake this city. Now, God was giving all of these places into their hands. He was going to allow them to be victorious as they marched through and brought these people down and took them out of the land and brought them to their death. Jericho was number one on the list. And so they went to Jericho, but it started out as sending some spies. Remember, they sent spies into Jericho and they stayed at Rahab's house. Rahab risked her life hiding those spies. And eventually they returned to Joshua with information, and Rahab and her household were spared in their working with the nation of Israel. And so they were able to be spared, and then Joshua was given instructions by God about how to approach the city and what to do for the time being. They marched around that city for 7 days according to God's instructions, quietly. For 7 days. And on the seventh day, they blew the trumpets, and then they yelled, and then, of course, remember, the walls fell down, and they were victorious. They went in there. Everything was able to be possessed. But God gave instructions, remember, that they were not to take any of the spoils of that first place. It was almost like God said, those things are mine. That's what He told them. This is the first fruits of the land, and all those spoils will belong to God. Well, there was a man, you remember his name was Achan, and he decided he was going to take some of those spoils that God had said were off limits. And he took a wedge of gold, a wedge of silver, and a Babylonian garment, and he stuffed them under his tent. He had them hidden there. And I want you to look with me at Joshua chapter 7, where we're going to start reading here. And you see how this works out. Because after they leave Jericho, after Jericho has been completely annihilated, they're going to go down the road to the second place. And the second place was a place called Ai. And so they do the same thing. They're going to send out some spies. They're going to get the information. Then they're going to find out what they need to do to send people in and overtake the second place. Take a look at this. Joshua chapter 7. But the sons of Israel acted unfaithfully in regard to the things under the ban. For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, from the tribe of Judah, took some of the things under the ban. Therefore, the anger of the Lord burned against the sons of Israel. Now, Israel had no idea that God's anger was burning against them. They were thinking that they were in good standing with God. Everything was fine. We're going to continue moving forward, making decisions. It's all going to work out. They didn't realize that God's anger was burning against them because of something that had been done. Look at verse 2. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth-aven, east of Bethel, and said to them, Go up and spy out the land. So the men went up and spied out Ai. They returned to Joshua and said to him, Do not let all the people go up. Only about 2,000 or 3,000 men need go up to Ai. And do not make all the people toil up there, for they are few. This is a small city. We don't need to trouble a bunch of soldiers, 2,000 or 3,000 max. And so Joshua is going to err on the side of caution and go with 3,000, right? So about 3,000 men from the people went up there, and they fled from the men of Ai. The men of Ai struck down about 36 of their men and pursued them from the gate as far as Sherebim and struck them down on the descent. So the hearts of the people melted and became as water. What went wrong? I mean, what happened here? And logically, we say, well, it was Achan's problem because he stole stuff, and now God's anger is against the people. That's part of the problem, but that's not all of the problem. The problem is here, they were leaning on their own understanding in deciding we're just going to send some spies. So what does Joshua do? Well, he did basically the same thing they did when it was time to take Jericho. Of course, those were instructions given by God. He was assuming it was just going to be the same thing, right? Send some spies down there, get some intel. Let's do some research. Let's gather some information. Let's find out what's going to be logical here and practical here. And then, by all means, let's send 3,000. You said 2 or 3. I say 3. Go ahead down there. Knock that out. We'll get that done. And then we'll go on to the next one. And it didn't work out. And the plan was sort of foiled as they ran away from Ai. 36 of them died. Those were people's family members. Those were somebody's fathers or brothers that died in that battle. And they're gone now. And they ran all the way back to Joshua. And Joshua, you can imagine how he's feeling. What is going on? Why is this happening? Doesn't this sometimes happen to us when we begin making plans? Maybe we've listened to God and we've done things His way on this occasion and things worked out, and then we listened to God and we did more things His way and it worked out, and then we sort of get ahead of ourselves, we start feeling good about ourselves, and we just say, well, it's going to always work out, and so, I'm going to do some research, I'm going to find out, I'm going to, get all the investigation I can, learn everything I can about this, I kind of see what's going on here, logically this makes sense, practically this will work, I know I can get this done with about this many resources and this much, and then we go forward thinking we've got a good plan, we've evaluated everything, we've researched everything, and we're making a good practical decision for what we know to be best. And then we wonder, why didn't it work out? Why did that plan not work? And there's a reason why it doesn't work. It's because we've leaned on our own understanding. In all of our investigative research and in all of our logical thinking, we still do not have the perspective of God on the matter. And so we're foolish to think we can advance just based on human wisdom. This is how so many people have met defeat in their lives, spiritually and physically, because they've done things without seeking God's counsel. Well, look at what Joshua does in the response to this. You can imagine how bad he feels now. And here's what he says in verse 6. Then Joshua tore his clothes, and he fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord until the evening, both he and the elders of Israel, and they put dust on their heads. Look at where he's at now. Now he's in the position where he should have been prior to them going up to Ai. He's down on the ground, face down, with dust on his head. After tearing his clothes, he's distraught. He's really seeking God now. And he's before the ark of God, him and the elders of Israel. They're all down there just basically until evening, having a quiet time with God. Wondering what is going on here. This is where we should be when we're seeking God's will in our lives. What am I going to do for the future? Well, we've got a lot of big plans, don't we? But what does God have in store for my future? What does God's Word really say that I should be looking for in the future? That's really what we ought to be looking at. Look at this. So then Joshua said, verse 7, Alas, O Lord God, why did you ever bring this people over the Jordan only to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites, to destroy us? If only we'd been willing to dwell beyond the Jordan. What does that sound like? Does that not sound like the children of Israel every time they met with some obstacle in the wilderness? Why did the Lord bring us out here into the wilderness to die? Is there not enough graves in Egypt? Oh, that we should have stayed in Egypt. Joshua is right back into this same predicament where he's thinking, God, why'd you bring us over here? And then he goes on and says, Oh Lord, what can I say since Israel has turned their back before their enemies? It's really not my fault. Israel's the one who ran scared. They shouldn't have took off like that. They should have stayed and fought. For the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear of it, and they will surround us and cut off our name from the earth. What will you do for your great name? Lord, what are you going to do about this to save your name in this? Is your name's about to be tarnished? Do you see how all this works? Joshua is very upset about this. He doesn't know what's going on. Why'd you bring us out here? Why'd those people run away scared? What are you going to do to protect your name? I don't know what to do here. You think about being in leadership positions. When you're in a leadership position, everything sort of falls on you, doesn't it? When things go wrong, he's not taking any real responsibility for this. I didn't seek your counsel, Lord. I didn't ask for what you were wanting me to do in this. And everything's sort of being pushed out. We've got to be careful when we're in leadership that we seek God's counsel, don't we? Because we can make decisions that will affect an entire congregation. And that's exactly what happens with Joshua here. He certainly was making decisions that was affecting everyone. And so 36 people were dead now. And he doesn't seem to be taking any responsibility. So the Lord said to Joshua, "Rise up. Why is it you've fallen on your face? Israel has sinned. They have also transgressed my covenant, which I have commanded them." Of course, we know what happened. The man named Achan was then identified by God. Now, Joshua is seeking God. Naturally, he's upset, and God is going to show him what's going on. There's a man named Achan. He stole some stuff. He's going to be brought to the forefront. They're going to go ahead and put him and his family to death, and then they're going to be able to move on and have success again. Well, after they do this and take care of Achan and the sin in the camp, as it were, then they go to Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And you remember there, what do? They hear read the blessings of the Lord and the curses of God. And those blessings and those curses remind them that if we choose to obey God, there's blessings. If we choose to disobey God, there's going to be curses on us. And hearing that sort of rededicates them and refocuses them on where their minds need to be, on God and what God has said and how God operates. And this is where we need to be, focusing on God, remembering His Word, and moving forward in accordance with His will. Well, you'd think, man, they've learned some lessons, and they're probably never going to repeat that again. Now go to Joshua chapter 9. Joshua chapter 9, and this is the only 2 slides I had this morning, so this is it. No, there's not going to be any more. I'm sorry. But, Joshua chapter 9. This is where the lesson really comes from this morning. And these men that are going to approach them, we can learn several lessons from them. It's the Gibeonites that we're going to be introduced to in Joshua chapter 9. So they moved from Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, and now they're going to continue in conquering the land. And let's read here beginning in verse 1. Now it came about when all the kings who were beyond the Jordan, in the hill country and in the lowland, and on all the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittite and the Amorite and the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, when they heard of it, they gathered themselves together with one accord to fight with Joshua and with Israel. Now, they've heard the story already that Jericho's been taken out, Ai's been taken out, they're moving through the land, knocking us off one place at a time. So they think, well, hey, the best chance we have, or they're just going to keep going, is we better all join forces and form this coalition of forces together to fight against them, and that'll give us the best standing chance. Let's all join together, we'll have a huge army, and we'll go out there and have this big battle, and we may be able to overthrow them. That's what they're thinking here. Well, the Gibeonites had a different idea, because they realized that there's no success in fighting against the army of God. And so they come up with another plan. Take a look at this. Verse 3, when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they also acted craftily and set out as envoys. And they took worn-out sacks on their donkeys and wineskins that were worn out, torn, and mended, worn out and patched sandals on their feet, and worn out clothes on themselves. And all the bread of their provision was dry and had become crumbled. And they went to Joshua to the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, "We've come from a far country. Now therefore make a covenant with us." The men of Israel said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you are living within our land. How then shall we make a covenant with you?" But they said to Joshua, "We are your servants." Then Joshua said to them, "Who are you and where do you come from?" They said to him, "Your servants have come from a very far country because of the fame of the Lord your God, for we have heard the report of him and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who is at Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spoke to us, saying, take provisions in your hand for the journey and go meet them and say to them, we are your servants. Now then, make a covenant with us. Well, you see in what is going on here, they have this elaborate deception that they've concocted. I mean, this is a serious camouflage. They have put together these disguises, these costumes, you might say. I mean, they've made it look like they're coming from so far away. Their stuff is so worn out. I mean, it would look like they've been traveling for months and maybe even, all close to a year or something, as worn out as everything was. And they come in there and they present themselves as being from so far away. We are wanting to be your servants. We are wanting to have a covenant with you. So make a covenant with us and make us your servants. Well, apparently, they had some intel on the military policy that God had given to the Israelites, right? We can see that when you go back. Keep your finger here and turn back to Deuteronomy chapter 7. They apparently knew what God had said about who you could let live and make a covenant with and who you had to kill. In Deuteronomy 7, verse 1 and 2, it says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land where you're entering to possess it and clears away every nation before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and stronger than you, when the Lord your God delivers them before you and you defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them and show no favor to them. So there was no way there was any covenant going to be made with anybody that was living in the land of Canaan. Well, turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 20. Let's add a little something to that. They apparently knew this as well. Deuteronomy chapter 20, beginning here in verse 10. When you approach a city to fight against it, you shall offer it terms of peace. If it agrees to make peace with you and opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall become your forced labor and shall serve you. However, if it does not make peace with you, but makes war against you, you shall besiege it. When the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you'll strike all the men in it with the edge of the sword. Only the women and the children and the animals and all that is in the city, all its spoil, you shall take as booty for yourself, and you shall use the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. Now notice, thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not of the cities of these nations nearby. Only in the cities of these peoples that are the Lord your God is giving as an inheritance, you shall not leave alive anything that breathes. You utterly destroy the Hittite, Amorite, Canaanite, Perizzite, Hivite, Jebusite, as the Lord your God has commanded you, and He's doing it for a reason. Otherwise, you're going to get involved in their idolatrous pagan practices. But He says anything that breathes, that lives within the land, must be utterly destroyed. Do not make a covenant. Do not make peace. There's not even an option. If you walk into that city and there's a man there, he's breathing, he's got to be put to death. A woman is there, she's breathing, she's got to be put to death. A cow is there, it's breathing. Everything that breathes had to be put to death, even children. God wanted it completely annihilated. And so these people realized that this is what God has said, and so they come and notice what they said. We are from very far away. Look how worn out all of our stuff is. And you see what they want Joshua to investigate their stuff. I mean, look at verse 12. They say this is Joshua chapter 9 again, verse 12. He says, this our bread was warm when we took it for our provisions out of our houses on the day that we left to come to you. But now behold, it's dry. It's become crumbled. These wineskins which were filled were new. And behold, they're torn. These are our clothes, and our sandals are worn out because of the very long journey. So they are saying, take a look at us and look at our stuff. You can see how worn out it is, how far we've come. You see, there's a deception going on here, isn't there? They've presented themselves as being somebody who is from far away, but the truth is they're from 25 miles down the road. They're from right around there. They should have been put to death, but they come in with this deceitful lie to the congregation of Israel and say, make a covenant with us. Let us join up and make peace with you and become a part of y'all. Now, it's not that Joshua and the children of Israel failed to investigate. They do their due diligence in searching and researching and gathering information and intel. Take a look at it in chapter 9. You see it there in verse 7. It says, the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you are living within our land. How then shall we make a covenant with you? Somebody had a wild idea that maybe these people aren't who they say they are. Maybe they actually live within the land, and that means we've got to put them to death. They knew God's military policy. And the people said to Joshua, we are your servants. Then Joshua said to them, who are you, and where do you come from? So they're starting to interrogate them a little bit to try to find out who they are. But these people are sticking to their lie. They're sticking to the deception. And they're trying to come in among the congregation there. But there's something about these people that's not quite right. It looks picture perfect, doesn't it? It looks so sweet and it looks so picture perfect. These people are from far away. And look at their torn, worn out, mended sacks and all their clothes. I mean, this just looks so good. Let's just welcome them right in. But there's a deception involved in this. There's something false about these individuals. And they're coming right into the congregation. And the leadership is trying to investigate. They're trying to do diligence. But the leadership is ultimately about to make a covenant with these people. And then it's going to be too late. Look at this. Watch verse 14. So the men of Israel took some of their provisions and did not ask for the counsel of the Lord. What went wrong there? Well, I'd say the same thing when they were about to go up to Ai. They were not asking the counsel of the Lord. When the disciples came to Jesus and said, why couldn't we drive it out? Do you remember what Jesus said? He said, you have little faith. That was Matthew's account. When you get over to Mark's account, what did he say? He says, because you have to drive it out by prayer. There's a certain amount of faith and prayer that go together where you are seeking God's help in the matter. That's how you drive it out. How is it that they are being fooled with this deception? How is it that they're not able to overcome this? Well, because they're not seeking the Lord's counsel. That's what's going on here. This is such a lesson for us. And you and I probably can testify time and time again in our lives where we have made decisions. We've gathered the intel. We've done the research. We've interrogated, investigated, and done all the things we can do. And we've said, this is the most logical way to proceed here. And then it didn't work out like we thought it would because we failed to seek the counsel of the Lord and give time. Look at what happens. Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them and let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. It came about at the end of 3 days after they had made a covenant with them that they had heard that they were neighbors and were living within their land. 3 days later, they found out the truth. Imagine if they would have said, you know, we're going to take some time and talk to God about this, and we'll let you know in a few days how things go. God would have revealed to them. Had they asked and sought His counsel, He would have told them who they were. Had they asked and sought His counsel before going to Ai, He would have said, no, don't go to Ai right now. You've got some sin in the camp you need to deal with first. Here's how you're going to do that. God would have revealed all that to them. But they simply weren't asking His counsel. They were proceeding and leaning on their own understanding, not trusting in the Lord. And so there is repercussions. They made this covenant with them. But how does this make Joshua feel once he finds out the truth? And the leaders of Israel, they are the ones who made the decision to make the covenant with them. Now we start finding out the truth about these people. It's not as picture perfect as we originally thought. There's a lie involved in this. There's some deceit. There's something false. There's something very false that's very detrimental here. And so what is the response? Well, verse 17, the sons of Israel set out and came to their cities on the third day. And their cities were Gibeon and Sephirah and Beeroth and Kiriath Jearim. And the sons of Israel did not strike them because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and the whole congregation grumbled against the leaders. Now, the congregation is upset, and there's some, blame being put at the feet of the leadership. But all the leaders said to the whole congregation, we have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we cannot touch them. This is what we will do to them, even let them live, so that wrath will not be upon us for the oath which we have sworn to them. The leaders said to them, let them live. So they became hewers of wood, drawers of water for the whole congregation, just as the leaders had spoken to them. There's another lesson involved in this when it comes to making covenants with people and making covenants with God. What does God feel about covenants? How serious does God take covenants? A covenant is an agreement where you make an agreement and you give your word, this is what I agree to. How does God feel when we give our word on something, we make a covenant with someone? I think about the covenant I've made as a Christian. If you're a Christian, you've made the same one. You've made a covenant with God. It'd be worse for you if you become a Christian and then fall away than not having ever become a Christian. 2 Peter 2, 20 through 22, a paraphrase. It would be worse if you fall away after knowing the truth. And so covenants are serious. God makes covenants with His people. That's how you have a relationship with Him. And that works out by Him saying, here's what the agreement is, here's the rules. And then we say, well, those benefits and those rules, I agree to that. I'll accept that. I'll live by that. And we do our best to live by His rules. And so the covenants that we make in life are serious. What about marriage? Young people, those of you who have not made the decision to marry yet, listen up. When you think about marriage, you need to seek the counsel of the Lord. You not only need to understand what His laws are regarding marriage and what you should be looking for in a spouse, but you need to also be praying and asking Him to help you to make the right decision and find that person that will complement you in serving Him and be there also serving Him with you, fearing God and doing His will. Don't go off thinking, I've done my research, this seems like a pretty good person. I mean, from all, accounts, they look good, everything seems good. It all presents itself being really well and good, and so I think I'm just going to go ahead and make a covenant with them. And you haven't really sought the counsel of the Lord yet. You can end up in a covenant situation, and what happened once the covenant was made? Now we can't touch them. We cannot just decide, well, we made a bad covenant, it ended up being a deception, and so you know what, we're just going to go ahead and terminate that, and we're going to kill these people anyway. God wasn't going for that. And when you make a covenant, then it becomes a permanent covenant, doesn't it? The same thing is true in marriage. Once you choose who you're going to marry and you say, I do, until death do us part, you're in a covenant. God has now joined you together with that person. And the Jews, they didn't see this very seriously, and so what they did is they'd get into a covenant with somebody, they'd get married to somebody, and then that person didn't end up being what they thought they were going to end up being. They get down the road a few years, and boy, I just don't like the way they do things. I don't like that they burn the toast all the time. They kind of have an attitude problem, and you know what? They just give them a certificate of divorce and send them away for any old reason, and those people would be able to go on their merry way. And then they would go off and they would marry somebody else until they got tired of them. And then they'd write them another certificate. And those certificates just went out like no problem. And Jesus, you remember what He said? He said, if anyone divorces his wife, except it be for fornication, and marries another, commits adultery. Jesus said you can't just give a certificate for any old reason. There's only one exception. And covenants in God's eyes are very serious. You can't just decide you're going to dissolve a covenant and it's going to be okay with God. But that's the culture we live in today. People are making decisions on their own, leaning on their own understanding, entering into covenants, sometimes with the Lord, sometimes with another human being, and then they decide when it gets rough down the road, I don't want to be in this anymore. And they'll throw it away. We need to think before we make covenants, before we give our word, and our yes ought to be yes, and our no ought to be no. This is the importance that God places on keeping our promises. Now, how important is it that we keep our word? Look how serious this was to God. Look in 2 Samuel chapter 21. 2 Samuel chapter 21 is 400 years after this covenant was made. The covenant was made with Joshua and the leadership of Israel and the Gibeonites. 400 years later, when David is king and Saul has done something to put Gibeonites to death. Take a look at this. 2 Samuel chapter 21. How serious are these covenants? It says there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year. And David sought the presence of the Lord. David knows what he needs to do. He seeks the Lord. He wants to talk to God. And the Lord said, it is for Saul and his bloody house, because he put the Gibeonites to death. So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the sons of Israel, but were of the remnant of the Amorites, and the sons of Israel had made a covenant with them. This covenant is brought up again 400 years later, and God says somebody's been messing around with the Gibeonites. Saul's been putting some of them to death. That's not according to the covenant. But Saul had sought to kill them in his zeal for the sons of Israel and Judah. And God knew exactly what Saul had done and what his motives were in doing it. And God brings it up 400 years later. You have violated this covenant that you made, and this is not in accordance with my will. Thus David said to the Gibeonites, "What should I do for you? And how can I make atonement that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord?" So David's offering the Gibeonites some kind of justice here. The Gibeonites said to him, "We have no concern of silver or gold with Saul or his house, nor is it for us to put any man to death in Israel." That was their answer. We're not looking for money, and we're not looking to put anybody to death. Well, Joshua insists. He says, "I'll do for you whatever you say." So they said to the king, "The man who consumed us and who planned to exterminate us from remaining within the border of Israel, let 7 men from his sons be given to us, and we will hang them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, the chosen of the Lord." And the king said, "I will give them." And he did. He gave 7 of Saul's descendants, male descendants, spared Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, and he gave the rest over, and they hanged him, and they killed them. But this is serious. God took that covenant very seriously, and once it was being violated, there was a 3-year-long famine, and 7 men of that man's household died because of the treacherous ways that covenant was being handled. 400 years later. You think God's serious about covenants? It makes you think twice about marriage, doesn't it? He's very serious about covenants. And when you give your life to the Lord and make a covenant with Him, Ecclesiastes 5:5 says it's better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. God expects you to keep your end of it. And of course, we see the evidence in the rest of Joshua chapter 9 of God's providence. And we'll end with this, but God's providence is that even in the midst of this foolish decision that was made by the leaders of Israel in establishing this covenant, God still is able to bless these individuals in this foolishness. And so you see in verse 22, "Then Joshua called for them and spoke to them, saying, 'Why have you deceived us, saying, we are very far from you when you're living within our land? Now therefore you are cursed, and you shall never cease being slaves, both hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God.' So they answered Joshua and said, 'Because it was certainly told your servants that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land, to destroy all the inhabitants in the land before you. Therefore we feared greatly for our lives because of you, and have done this thing. Now behold, we are in your hands. Do as it seemed good and right in your sight to do to us.' Thus he did to them, and he delivered them from the hands of the sons of Israel, and they did not kill them. But Joshua made them that day hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord to this day, in the place which he would choose." Don't you know, over the course of those hundreds of years, as those people were still there, living in their midst, drawing the water, hewing the wood, cutting all this, they were involved in taking those things to the congregation, their provisions, but also they were serving the altar. Don't you know that some of those Gibeonites ended up developing a true fear of the Lord, seeing the true worship of the Lord, being near the altar and being a part of that? They were in a covenant and they were in a servitude, but they were also able to see the true worship of God and come near to God's people. And so through that, even in the midst of that deception, God blessed those children of Israel, and He blessed the Gibeonites to be able to find the truth and see the truth. And I wonder how many of them ended up proselytes and ended up saved as a result of that. We'll never know until we get to heaven. But that's a fascinating story with a lot of lessons in it for us. If you've made a covenant and you are regretting maybe a covenant that you've made, you need to seek God's counsel and continue to be faithful in what you have established. God does not give permission to just throw away covenants. He has given His specific law, and He has given one exception. And there is only one reason why somebody can get out of a marriage covenant. And you'll never get out of a covenant with the Lord once you dedicate your life to Him. If you decide to walk away, it'll be worse. And we all know people who have decided to run away from the Lord. And it breaks our heart. And we hopefully are praying for them and trying to do what we can to make them realize the error of their way and come back, because they're in a covenant with God and He takes it very, very seriously. Maybe you haven't decided to make that decision yet, and this morning you've been contemplating making a covenant with God. You're ready to dedicate your life to Him, and He has made plain what He will do for you: remove your sins by the blood of His Son, Jesus Christ, whom He allowed to die on a cross. He'll give you forgiveness of all of your sin, all that you've committed and will commit. And He'll make you His own child. and He'll welcome you into His eternal kingdom and bless you for eternity. It's really a good deal. Best one you'll ever find. If you've not made that decision yet, we plead with you earnestly to make a covenant with the Lord this morning. You do that by repenting of your sin, confessing Him as Lord, and being baptized for the forgiveness of your sins. If you're already in a covenant with the Lord and you've strayed from that and you've made some mistakes and you want to confess those sins and get back right with God, you can do that this morning. You can do that right now as we stand and as we sing. Just come forward. Mm-hmm.